What drives a 13-year-old to murder? Today I team up with top psychologist Dr. Jeffrey Gold, who has a specialty in child psychology, to expose the dark truths behind the Netflix series Adolescence, diving into toxic masculinity, incel culture, and the terrifying power of the internet to shape young minds. Today on Off the Couch. And welcome to Off the Couch, where psychology meets everyday life. I'm Dr. Greg Cason here with Brian Gomez.
Happy Monday, you guys.
Hi, Brian. And we have Tony on the board. Tony, feel free to dive in, too. But I have a very special guest today. It's Dr. Jeffrey Gold, and he's a clinical psychologist, researcher, professor in anesthesiology, pediatrics, psychiatry, and behavioral sciences. With nearly 3 decades of clinical and research experience. In fact, your vita is so long. And one of our, I'm just going to dive right in to say that we were in graduate school together, and one of our mutual professors once told me, the longer your vita, the bigger researcher you are. She said, Vitas are they're like resumes with all your publications. she said they're like penis length. And so it's basically giving you a compliment there. So with nearly 3 decades of clinical and research experience, Dr. Gold has widely recognized for his work on pediatric behavioral health, early intervention strategies, and the psychological impact of systemic stress on youth. His insights have shaped national conversations around adolescent development, emotional resilience, and the growing influence of digital culture on mental health. In fact, you've done some very innovative studies there. But the reason that we're doing this talk today is to talk about the show Adolescence.
Correct.
The Netflix hit series Adolescence. Did you see it?
Yes, I watched it.
Okay, good. Adolescence, just to talk to you, I'm sure everyone knows it because it is something that has caught the zeitgeist of the world, is a gripping Netflix limited series that follows the arrest of an unraveling of a 13-year-old boy accused of murder, all told in 4 real-time episodes. So this is a pretty cool thing because they film everything. It's 4 different episodes. Each episode is one solid take.
Single shot
the entire time. They do not stop. So it's really raw, intense, disturbing, intimate, the whole thing. And it just pulls you right in. And it's striking a chord because it feels so real and so timely.
Yes.
But Jeff.
Yes.
Or Dr. Gold. I'm so sorry.
Oh, Jeff is good.
We're friends, so
yes.
I'm a little bit too relaxed. No, it's this one really disturbed me. What was your first reaction when you saw this series?
I mean, I think the one shot was really interesting because it really draws you in. You're really part of the family, the school. You're really in that experience, which I really enjoyed. And at times claustrophobic because it was like you were right in close and personal. And I love that. I love being part of that. And it was intense. It was more intense than most other shows that you are watching passively on the couch. So, but basically, it was beautifully constructed. The cinematography was incredible. The acting was brilliant, honestly, and the storylines were pretty complex and pretty riveting. Actually, it's a multifactorial sort of perspective on this storyline. I think we're going to talk about that today, but it was really powerful. Yeah,
I was really drawn in. The whole one shot thing. The only thing I'd ever seen like that before was in Citizen Kane. You see that opening shot that just goes on forever, and you're like, how did they do that?
Yeah.
So this accomplishment
was
crazy because it was as if they were not being filmed. It was as if it was a play or a real life thing that the camera just happened to be moving around and catching things as they really happen.
And you felt that in the opening episode, right? When they came through the house, and you'll talk about that. And at school, when you're in the hallways, you're in the classrooms, you're on the play yard, when you're leaving school, when you're entering school, like you really just feel like you're part of the crowd. So that's really intense.
Well, you know what? Let's just dive right in there. We'll just go right to the talk about the first one. So Yeah. The arrest that happened, that's when the Army police raid of the Miller's family, that's when the little boy is arrested. 13-year-old Jamie Miller on the suspicion of murdering his classmate Katie Leonard. And they basically bust into the house and go and arrest him. And the family is caught at, like, let's say 6 in the morning. And they don't really give a time, I guess. But it's before school, you know, and he hasn't even gotten out of bed yet. So, and he is just really terrified and pulled in and arrested. And the parents can't go with him, etc. I was immediately struck by, if it were me in that situation, what would that be?
Yeah. I think that he was cowering in his bed.
He was.
Right. And obviously he knows what's going down. Right. It's not new to him. So he's in his bed, he's cowering, his parents are yelling and screaming, right? Mom's yelling, dad's screaming, what's going on with my boy? What are you doing? Et cetera, et cetera. They're just asking where the boy is, where Jamie is. And he's just sitting in his room cowering, kind of fearing and knowing. Like he's aware of what's happening, and yet he's just sitting in his room in this shot that he just showed, cowering in his bed, just waiting.
So what I really liked about this, just to dive into personal opinion, is it showed how everyone is terrified and tortured during a house break-in.
Yep.
The police were like, we have a job to do. This is just what we're doing. They come in, they bust down the door, they start going through things.
Right.
The mother, the daughter, the dad, like they had zero control in their own house.
Right.
And then the little boy getting up out of bed and having pissed himself.
Right.
Because he's so scared.
Right. And yet he calls his dad, and this is a theme throughout the whole show, because he leans on his dad in a lot of ways. And a lot of people are curious, why is he leaning on his dad so much, right? So he does that initially when they bust in. He's calling for his dad, right? He wants to talk to his dad, and his dad's trying to reach out to him. So you see this connection with his father that you don't yet understand, right, until later in the show.
No. Yeah, no, the father was a very interesting character. By the way, do you know that the father, the actor who played the father, was also the creator of the show?
Yep.
Did you know that, Brian?
Yeah,
everyone knew
Wow.
that.
Yeah, it was great.
I guess only I'm surprised.
Well,
by
he
that
was. I mean, he
information.
was a discovery, and the character Jamie was a discovery. Both kind of a first time for them, I think, in this.
Well, I think Dad had been an actor for a long
but the
time,
boy that
but
he
the
cast-
boy was brand new.
Yep.
Brand new.
Yep.
Yeah, and so this goes, and then you pull him into the police station. Now, you and I have worked in police stations. Haven't you worked in
Yes.
police stations? So I was
And
like,
prisons.
but certainly not in England.
In prison, not in England.
So what my first reaction, by the way,
Yeah.
I don't know what yours was. My first reaction is, wow, they're really nice in
Yes.
England.
Yeah, a lot of people had issue with that in this episode.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, they had a lot of issue with how nice that he and the family were being treated, because he was under suspicion of being a murderer. Why would they treat him so kindly and so nicely, right? And there's been talks about race, like if this was a brown or black kid, that that would not have been the same type of treatment, and that this family was treated like royalty, and all the way down to the police house, basically, which was pretty surprising. And something else with him is that he says to his father in episode 1, I didn't do anything.
Right.
He repeated it over and over. I didn't do anything, right? So again, knowing what he knows and cowering as he cowered and the fear that he had, he still was fronting like, I'm fine, I'm innocent, I didn't do anything, everything's fine, but I need my dad. And he pissed himself, right? So it's right. I mean, it's really complicated, right? It's complex to think of what he's going through too, from his point of view.
No, and in fact, I wondered about that because I thought that's sort of true to life when you're a kid. I don't know if this was how I was as a kid. When you would do something wrong, you would just assert, I didn't do it.
Correct.
Wasn't me. Because your parents might buy it.
Right. And they did.
They did.
Right. They did. Yeah, they did. I mean, that is I want to, like, at some point I'm going to talk about this sort of the shame rage model that can drive some of this violence. And I think that he's starting to experience that in episode 1. You see that his shame by, again, pissing himself, he's embarrassed, and he's starting to manipulate, right? He's starting to tell everybody either to protect himself or to manipulate everybody else that, hey, I didn't do anything, I'm totally innocent, everything's completely fine, I don't know why this is happening.
Oh, so this is, let's dip our toe in the water. So the shame rage model is what?
Right. So if you experience shame, if you discharge the shame by acknowledging it and recognizing, oh, wow, I did something and I'm embarrassed by that, it gets discharged in a healthy kind of way.
We call that a shame attack. And
exactly. But in the shame rage model, right, what happens is it goes into rage and you start blaming everybody else for what has happened to you. Right. Which then
the projectors, the Hector projectors out there.
Which then leads to violence, because then you feel irritable and angry and furious and et cetera, temperamental, and then you start to rage at other people, which then again creates more shame, rage and shame and rage. And so that gets into this fairly kind of cyclical pattern that is very destructive.
In fact, during that first episode, he kept saying, I didn't do anything wrong.
Correct.
Which isn't the same as I didn't do it. He did say that too at different points.
Correct.
But he kept saying, I didn't do anything wrong. And I had to keep thinking, did he think what he did was okay? So just to give it away, eventually they do show a video of him stabbing the girl. There is no mystery that he, in fact, did the crime he was accused of doing.
And that comes out early.
Right
away.
Yeah.
And they show the father.
And they show the father, and you mean during the arrest, and then the father had believed him, but the father then was disabused of his belief.
Correct.
And was so horrified. And actually, I think that actor did an amazing job. But what did you think? Because when the father finally realizes and he breaks down that his son did do it, and then the boy, Jamie, is crying and he reaches over to his father and the father pulls away. What did you think about that?
I mean, the rejection, right? The rejection of his own son, right, is complicated in that he wants to protect his son, and that's kind of the job of a parent, is to protect the child. But at the same time, he's kind of disgusted by what he just watched, right? And so, how do you come to sort of rest around that? How do you take that shadow side and what you think of your child side, and how do you sort of mend those together? And so, his first response is to recoil, right? So pull back, because he's, I think, just disgusted by what he's witnessed. And I think it takes time, like, because parents also blame themselves. I mean, if you look into, the news about people who've committed murder and how the parents feel about that, right? Whether guilty or not guilty, or they blame the kid, or they blame themselves for what they did or didn't do. There's a whole, so he's spiraling around that. Oh my goodness, my child has committed this murder, this heinous murder, and he has to grapple with that and come to some sort of conclusion about his own role in that. What did I do? Guilt, right? Guilt, which can lead to shame, which can lead to, again, feeling isolated and recoiling and pulling back and not being able to face it. I mean, I think that's really what's going on for that dad in that moment, in that split moment, right? And so, but ultimately we see him lean in, right? But he had initially, on first take, pulled back.
Yeah, you see so much happen with the dad, and it was only upon retrospect, because I was following the story and I was focused on the boy.
Right.
You only realize how much the father is actually going through, because he can't protect his family. He's completely powerless. He's, authority is taking over. They're taking his son from him. They're arresting him.
Well, everyone's looking at him too.
Oh, like, what did you do? And in fact, that comes up in the first episode, because then they keep wondering, was there, because they said a previous case there'd been sexual abuse with the dad. Why did, what if he's choosing the dad? And they keep introducing that doubt in the first episode.
And yet, the way that it was spun, the way that it was written, and the way that it was choreographed as a piece of art, as a movie, was that they were an ideal, like, hardworking middle-class family. And that there wasn't any sort of foul play, no physical abuse, no verbal abuse, no sexual abuse, is kind of what they spun. So again, they leave the audience hanging, because the audience wants to believe there's trauma so that they can kind of go, check, right? Oh, that's why.
And that's not me. That's not, that's not in my family, so we're okay.
Correct. And I think that the creators did this on purpose to make people really grapple more deeply with this non-schism because they're just a regular, typical developing family that doesn't have trauma in the family. And the father was going back about the ways in which he managed his own anger, right? He was not a very expressive man. He grew up, it sounded like, in a family that might have been more aggressive or abusive.
Oh, yeah.
And that he had to manage
You find out in episode 4.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. But that he didn't want to do that to his kids, so he was more buttoned up. Right.
Yeah.
And so then he had to ask the question, oh, wow, does me being buttoned up and not expressing emotion put my child in this non-expressive, violent sort of space? So he's wrestling with all that, right? He has to wrestle with all that. He has to look at himself.
But you see that reinforced in the first episode, too, because remember the attorney saying to him, like, chin up.
Yeah,
like,
buck up.
Buck up.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
get over it.
Yeah,
like, you know, just going. And you're like, oh, my God. I mean, those aren't exactly words of consolation for what he's going through.
No, it doesn't work for that way. And I don't think he came from that, so it's sort of hard for him. And the mother really became not as at the forefront.
No.
She was right behind him, but not really in the front like the dad was.
No, the mother and sister, especially in the first episode, were just sort of ancillary.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what did you think, Brian? About it?
I mean, like you said, it happened to a normal family, that there was no trauma, that we always look for something to like pin it on and be like, oh, it was that, you know, that it makes you think like, wow, me having a kid in the future, like you try to make sure that they're like the best little humans you create, you know, and for that possibility to happen without it being like a trauma or something that's happening behind closed doors is just so scary that we were talking about it earlier, how like, I don't know if I could have hugged the child. Like I would have snapped and like, you know, like as my child having done that, I would have been like, you are not my child at that point, you know? So that's why I was just so interesting how, I mean, you guys are talking about he's battling with so much at the same time that it's like, yeah, I guess you don't know what would happen.
Right.
You know, how would you react in those moments?
Yep.
Just scary. I mean, it can happen, you know.
It can, it does.
It can and it does. There is another sideline story. I did not mean to dive into the first episode this much, but just realizing the depth of it. The two detectives.
Right.
They start out the series like just the two detectives starting their day, kind of a boring old day, talking to each other, starting their day. Okay, you know, are we getting ready? This is what's going on at home, blah, blah, blah. You realize that for them, this is just another day of work. This is the most traumatizing day, one for the family of the victim, two for the family of the murderer.
Right.
And to the detectives, this is just another day of work, which does set you up for the second episode.
Correct.
So, because when they go into the school, I think especially the male detective is really moved by the second episode in the school.
And I think that again, it's the shows come from so many points of view. Right?
Yes.
So many facets and perspectives, and you could jump on any one of them, right? You could have an hour-long conversation about any one character, and which is why it's so well written, right? Is that there's that layering, right? Those old movies that we used to love to watch, where there was like 7 stories, and then by the end of the movie they all intertwine.
Yeah.
Your brain's just tinkering on all these, and that's kind of what they did in a very brief 4-part episode or a series, was to get all of these layering of stories and get you to stand in their shoes. Right. What would it be like to be the police officer? What would it be like to be, you know, the mother, the father, the son, the daughter, like the victim's family? Like, they get you to take perspective, right?
They do get you to take
And I think
perspective.
that's really important. Lived experience, right? It's all about like, can you slip into their shoes and live that experience for this series? And I think that's what they were shooting for.
And, you know, I mean, you get to a point where you're just like, I'm not sure like who to blame this on. Like you actually start to see the real problem.
Which is why we have the buzz around it, because people like little bows at the end of the story.
They do generally like bows.
Yeah. And that's not what they were trying to do here.
But this car crash you couldn't look away from. I mean, it was so well done. It was a well done car crash.
Yes, it was.
Let's talk about the second episode. Okay. That's the investigation. This, to me, in many ways, was my favorite episode. Okay. Although everyone else says something different. Number 3, which we'll talk about. But I was stunned by this episode. There were so many like subtle things that happened. This is when the two detectives, Bascom and Frank, delve into Jamie's school life. They go in and they're also trying to retrieve the murder weapon. So they go into the school. They interview classmates. They find out that Jamie's exposed to online misogynistic content. So that's the manosphere stuff, which we'll talk about, and in-school and online bullying. And this also happens, we meet friends that are very pivotal to the story. One, Ryan, who provided the weapon, and also Jade, the best friend of the person who was murdered, of the woman, a girl who was murdered. So what are your initial thoughts on the second episode? I could dive into all of mine.
Well, I mean, I just think that, I have friends who are teachers, right? And it was very like on brand.
Wow, was it good?
Right. It's really on brand to be a school teacher and see all that happening, because school teachers feel really helpless around handheld devices, kids talking in class, kids talking back to teachers in class, where everyone's out of control, right? They chill, like the patients are running the asylum.
Yeah.
That's really what's happening here. And so a lot of teachers were really vibing hard on that episode, because they were like, yeah, that's my life, right? Every day, this is what it's like for me. I can't teach a kid because of all of what's happening. And so I thought at a macro level, that was really interesting, because you really enter the school and feel the vibration of the teachers and the students really, again, running the asylum.
And, in the first episode, you find out Jamie's favorite class is history.
Yeah.
And then he says, and then the lawyer's kind of drilling him down. Like, is this just a BS answer, or is this a real answer? Jamie knew all. He said, what's your favorite period? I think he said industrial or something. He just goes down into all this stuff and talks about his favorite things and why, which is kind of interesting now that I'm thinking about the manosphere, because it was a time of great creation. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, just to go backwards, he said that was his favorite class. Then we talked to the history teacher later.
Right.
And he's hands off about Jamie.
Right.
All he does is show videos and doesn't really pay attention to the kids.
That's right. That's the way to manage the class.
And he even came in late when the detectives
His
were there.
shirt's on top.
He was in the bathroom,
shovel.
I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, because I think the kids are running the school, the teachers are exhausted, and you feel this sense of that there's not a lot of learning happening.
Not a lot.
Right. And I think what starts to percolate like pretty quickly is that the bullying, you start to hear a lot about the bullying in the school, which we know this. I mean, we know this in our society, whether it's social media or whether it's Insta messaging and et cetera. We know this is happening, and it starts to come into focus that he's really a target for that.
Well, let's talk about the difference between what we grew up with, because bullying is not like a new thing, and what they have to deal with.
Yeah.
Because what we grew up with was no different than, there is the detective's son in the video who is bullied pretty intensely.
Yeah.
And he's bullied in the more traditional way. He's called names. They would demand money from him.
Right.
They throw their trash at him. And it's just, he just kind of exists within this world and just somehow manages. And what you see is the teachers and the administrative personnel really not doing anything, just saying, just stop that, like very weakly.
Right. Well, and it also reflects how, like, his dad doesn't know this is happening.
No, his dad has no idea.
The disconnect between the parental...
Why do you think his dad doesn't know?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, a lot of kids keep many things deeply under wraps.
That's true.
And I think that's a lot of the kids are operating from that space of, this happens to me and I'm not going to tell my family about it. Whether it's online bullying or in real person bullying.
Well, I always wondered if not always, just since I saw the show, but wondered if it was shame that was really driving him to do that, but also feeling like, if I tell my dad, nothing's going to be done.
Right. Right.
And I remember going through stuff when I was a kid and thinking, if I told the teachers, nothing will be done. In fact, I'll get it worse.
You'll get it worse. Right. Yep. And that's true.
So,
and I think that has cut across all time, right? If you're the one who blows the whistle, gets somebody in trouble, that it's going to come back on you. tenfold. So,
Right.
But I did like and appreciate how they drove that schism pretty clear. Whether it was incel, right? Things that were going like the police officers have no idea what's going on in current culture.
No.
So they can't really get in there because they don't even know what they're saying, doing, or asking. And so that schism that you see with students and teachers, you also now see it with the parent because the parent's a detective in school. So that becomes really clear that how are these detectives supposed to help? They don't even know what they're asking. They don't even know what they're hearing.
In fact, that was probably one of the better scenes to me is when the son took his father aside and said, "You aren't getting it.
Right.
You aren't getting what's going on here," and explained. He called it Insta. He explained Instagram, and he explained what these emojis meant.
Yes, that's right.
Explained the exploding red pill versus blue pill, and the father goes, "Oh, from the Matrix," which would be my immediate response.
Right.
And the kid doesn't even know what the Matrix is,
Right.
but knows these pills.
Correct, because it's been rewrapped. Basically,
and was that the kidney beans? I forget. It was like there were so many references that the kid's an incel. They were saying things to him,
absolutely,
and bullying him online that ratcheted up, and that the murder victim herself, had been bullying this kid.
Correct, absolutely.
And she had reason. I mean, I'm not going to say. She had some, we find out later she had some reason.
Right.
But let's go into the whole manosphere thing because that was the surprise to the detectives.
Right.
And even when they're like, "Oh, have you heard of this?" Like, and one says, "Yeah, no, Andrew Tate." And then one of the school administrators says, "Oh, yeah, I think I've heard the kids saying his name."
Right.
So let's just talk about the manosphere and what that is. Okay. I took from an article here, what is the manosphere? And it's just a network of misogynistic online communities. But it's linked to the rise of male influencers like Andrew Tate. And the researcher here thought the root causes were poverty, isolation, and inequality. I really never thought about the actual roots of this, but I thought that was actually kind of interesting because there's a big belief within the system that if you're not in power, then you have power taken over. There's no equality.
Right. Correct.
There's just none. Either you're in power or you're getting screwed.
Right. That's right. And I think that's where a lot of it stems from. It's that shame again. I mean, incel means involuntarily celibate.
Yes.
Right. But that's not how it started. It didn't start. It wasn't associated with the manosphere. It's become associated with the manosphere, but that's not how it started. It started by a woman who was involuntarily celibate, and she was feeling lonely about that. And she created a community of other people who were involuntarily celibate to have an online presence to support each other. Wow. They wanted to have relationships.
Wow.
Yeah, the history of incel is very deep and not just immediately linked to the manosphere. So I think if you think about it, it's sort of like, it's been likened to like Oppenheimer. Like she created something really beautiful to support each other, and it got weaponized, right? And that's where we see incel now. It's being weaponized in the bullying sphere, basically, where that's not really where it had come from. It had come from an empowerment place for people to gather and support each other.
That totally makes sense because then the bullying that's what doesn't believe in equality, because here she's saying, "I want support. Let's all join hands and not feel so alone and not."
Let's support each other. Like, this is not where we don't want to be.
And it's not negative. Right. We can be here together.
Correct. That's the humanity of where incel comes, or where it comes from. And I think that it's gotten twisted and weaponized. I mean, it's just the easiest way to say it, because we see that in lots of examples in world, how things that were developed for good can get used for evil. I mean, unfortunately. So I think it turns really interesting because you see them using that as a bullying tool or mechanism against that boy, and then he feels shame about it.
He feels shame, and he's just a little boy.
Right.
Here he's 13 years old. I remember the kid kept saying, "I'm ugly, I'm ugly." He said that in the third episode. He kept saying, "I'm ugly," and I was like, "Oh, I remember thinking that. I remember thinking I was ugly."
Yeah, I mean, I think the percentage of time people spend thinking about, are they attractive? Do they fit in? Are they regular? Is like probably 80%. People are like ruminating about, am I just a regular person?
Oh my God, especially in middle school, like the age he was. was.
Yeah.
Because do you remember? I do remember. Like you were so tuned into what people were wearing, and my mom wanted to buy me. I always had to get J.C. Penney jeans, and I wanted Levi's because the other kids had Levi's, and they shopped at the Gap.
Right.
And I was like, my mom's like, no, don't shop at the Gap
or Miller's Outpost.
That was it. I think that's where they sold the Levi's. I don't know, one of the two. But yes, that was like the very specialty stores. But I mean, I'm in total awe of my mother now. That she pulled it together, and she raised 3 kids and, alone and did the whole thing.
Yeah.
But when you're a kid, you're just looking around at, wow, they have those types of thongs, and I have to buy the ones from Save On, and these people are buying the ones from OP.
That's right.
Ocean Pacific. But it's very funny.
And there's so much energy put into just trying to be regular, whatever that is.
Regular, fitting in. That seems to be all that it is. In fact, in that first episode, there's a character called Ryan. Okay. Second episode in the school. And they're interviewing the kid about he ends up being the one who provided the weapon. And they say to Ryan, they're trying to ask him questions, and he turns to the cop and says, were you popular?
Right.
I'll bet you were popular.
Yeah.
Like he only really wants to know like that this guy had power.
Right.
And he's like, well, I did well. I was pretty popular and da-da-da. And he's like, wow.
Yeah.
Like it was as if he was meeting a star.
Yeah, of course. 100%.
And it really helped you see his value system.
But I think that's correct in that era, of that period of time of being an adolescent. Like that's what matters, right? It's just the fitting in. And with the layering of social media and all of the things that we know, all the online presence, it gets very complicated to navigate all of that layering. And I think that's really what drives this kid. I mean, whether you think he's a sociopath, right? Or if you think he's got an intermittent explosive disorder, like a behavioral disorder that doesn't exist anymore in the DSM. But if you think it's
that's too bad.
Right. Or if you think it's conduct disorder that's morphing into psychopathy. Like a lot of people want to pathologize. Was there a trauma? I don't really know. But
they don't land on a diagnosis here.
No, they do not. But when you layer in all the social media and whatnot, it really does make it so much more complicated because you can't tease that apart anymore, because it really is bringing in variables that you hadn't really had to think about before in diagnostic thinking.
In fact, that you're kind of pointing out one of the limitations of the diagnostic and statistical manuals of what we use to diagnose, because it basically kind of puts responsibility onto the person who's exhibiting the diagnosis. Right. And it may be like we see it more like an illness, that they have it, but we don't necessarily say, of course this is understandable. Like people who come to me for ADHD, and I'm like, they don't have ADHD, but of course you have attention deficit. You live in this world. Yep. This is the world. And when you're on social media all the time, when you're only watching short form videos, when you're, constantly demanding things entertain you,
it's going to trigger all.
Then you're going to shorten your attention span.
Yep.
So
it's that epi part. It's that epi part of the behavior.
So is this going to be, is it really their fault, or is it a brain disorder, or is it that their brain is just reacting to the world they're in?
Right, and the show does not land on any of that stuff on purpose, to leave us tortured and not knowing.
Tony, I forget, how far are we? Because I've lost track of the time.
We're getting ready to start episode 3.
Oh, episode? No, I meant how much more time do we have?
We have about 20-25 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah. I completely...
You're having so much fun
up in this.
Oh no, I could realize that I was in some other zone talking to you. I was so interested.
You're like, we're here,
and I have 18 things I want to say that I completely lost track of time.
Yeah.
So hope you don't mind.
Same.
Back online.
So yeah, we talked about I don't know, all this stuff, the culture of hypermasculinity, etc. What was also interesting, there was another character in episode 2 in the school, Jade.
Yes.
Jade was the best friend of the girl who was murdered, and she was in many ways gave me goosebumps. What an interesting character, because she was so angry and was angry at everybody, and was almost not terrified, but so scared that they would try to lay blame on Katie for
Right.
what happened to her,
Correct.
which I understood. And she understood what was going on. And to give a backstory, you find out later, is that the girl who was murdered had sent her topless picture, I guess, to another boy.
Yep.
And instead of him keeping that picture to himself, he sent it to the school.
Right.
He sent it to everybody. And that's what started them going after these boys. That caused Jamie to think that he could get this girl.
Correct.
Because she was now weakened. And like a weakened animal separated from the pack,
Yep.
Jamie was going in for the kill. But instead, he couldn't get her to go on a date with him.
Correct.
Remember, he said, I put on my best tracksuit. And then he goes in to get a date with her, and she
Shuts him down.
shuts him down. She says, no way, man.
Yeah.
And then he takes
Has
out a
switched.
knife
Right.
and murders her.
Right.
And it was the little boy Ryan who gave the knife, and he just thought they were trying to scare her.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that this is the meat and potatoes. Like that incident right there.
Yeah.
That speaks to the poor emotional regulation.
Yes.
Right. The inability to manage rejection. The like you say, the going in at a vulnerable time with this woman. I mean, that's what the manosphere speaks about, right?
Yeah.
It gives you an instruction manual how to go in when people are vulnerable and to do, to make your move or whatever, right? That's really what it speaks to. How to take advantage of and manipulate people for your own needs, irrespective of what their needs are, right? So it's not really considering the other, right? In object relations, which is a theory in psychology, using other people as representations of things that you need, right, and manipulating them for your own gain is pathology, right? Because you don't see the other
You don't see them as people.
or a human or somebody who has feelings or anything. And so that's what ends up happening in these sort of manosphere relationships, is that these women in this case are just objects to satisfy the person's needs, whatever that is.
And
so that's what
how those objects react to them determines their worth.
Yeah.
If the woman
Correct.
comes toward them, then they're worth something. If the
Correct.
woman rejects them, then that puts their worth in a lower position, which
Yes.
means they have to then attack the thing that rejected them.
Well,
Going back to your shame.
Yeah, the shame rage thing, right?
Yeah.
So if he could have recognized, oh, she's not interested in me, and moved along, then that's a successful discharge of the shame, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't do that. He actually, he killed her, so he was dysregulated, had no capacity to regulate, and just had a rageful response, right? And the rageful response has led to the murder. So, people could say, "Oh, well, who does that?" Right? Like who would do that?
But aren't they
that's- right.
saying it could be anybody?
Right, and that's the crux of the story. It's not the who done it, right, as much as it's the why did he do it.
Why? And
Right.
so let's go to episode 3.
Okay.
That was the big one that everyone loved. It was where it's just a single basic shot, the psychologist entering the facility. I've done this so many times. I was never a forensic psychologist, which is in her role, like working for the attorneys. I did research. I was doing research, but oh, how familiar this was. Walking in, going, having to meet the person, etc.
Yeah.
And then she's harassed the minute she gets there.
Correct.
Because she's female, and I had to think, dude, I was never harassed.
Right.
And I thought, wow, I had not thought about, how that happens so constantly.
Yeah. Well,
and they
she- yeah,
portrayed that very
She
well.
was trying to get hit on at the vending machine or
Yeah.
something, right? Yeah, yeah. And she was coming to do her job, and she's like having to fend off people's advances on her.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
And it was, and she held him off, and then she goes in and meets with the boy, and I think that was an extremely powerful interview. By the way, what's your take on the job she did as a psychologist?
Well, it's interesting. I think my main criticism is psychologists, they don't get shook that easily.
As she did?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
I
like-
was surprised how easily she got, but
Yeah.
it's a
She's like trembling around the hot cocoa. I'm like, are you serious right now? Like, you work in prisons, and this is a 13-year-old boy coming at you with this hostility, and you're like twitching like that? Seems kind of weird, right? That I don't know why they portrayed it that way from the art standpoint.
well for the vulnerability
For the
that she was. I thought that was it, and
Yes.
because if they had a male, and he said there was a male psychologist that came, and his questions were easy and everything was fine because there wasn't that sexual tension.
Correct.
That now Jamie was really kind of he was really flirting with her intensely and
Yes.
going at her.
And the rejection. That's
And the
really what set
rejection.
him off, right?
Yeah.
It did remind me of that. I think was it called Primal Fear with Ed Norton? Was that the?
Oh yeah,
remember that?
I didn't see it.
Yeah, it was. He was a certifiable sociopath, right? And at some point during his performance, he just flipped, right? And it came out that he had multiple sort of personalities and etc. It was very complicated, and this was very different than this, but it was sort of a la that kind of movie take where all of a sudden he's being this sweet, coy, kind of quiet. Then he starts getting aggressive towards her, making advances towards her. She rejects him.
Asking her questions, mocking her.
Yeah, mocking her. And then he had his blow up, right?
Yeah.
Which was just kind of paralleled probably what happened with his experience with his peer that he then went on to murder, right? So it just shows you his underbelly right away that he just flips that switch from being, contained to like being rageful.
In fact, he couldn't contain himself so much that he confessed.
Yeah.
He said, "What blah blah what I did, da da da," and he's like, "No, you didn't hear that, blah blah blah."
Right, because he's a child, so he wasn't doing a great job of it. But but I think the dynamic was really clear. He was rebuffed, he was rejected, and he just into a fit of rage. And I think that's what they were trying. I think that's where they were trying to make that connectivity to the sort of the toxic masculinity, the hyper masculinity. Yeah. That was where they really started to showboat him beyond the murder, but to show that sort of evidence that now supports it even more so, like that this kid has clearly got some underlying issues around.
And this is where they again played with the possible sexual abuse, which I thought was interesting because, again, you didn't see any evidence of that, but here it's coming out. And she's pushing him a little bit to what's this relationship with your father?
Right.
And clearly he has a relationship with his father, but it's suppressed emotionally, like he can't deal with things. But, she's still trying to explore that, and that made him go very... upset. He could sense what was going on.
And again, the role as a psychologist,
right?
That's not what happens, right? When you're interviewing somebody like that you just keep pressing and impressing and impressing it.
No, I guess not. No, well, I mean, nonetheless, I was like, I liked the job she did, even though I did have my issues. What I noticed when he stood up and screamed, I have had someone do that at me before.
Same.
And what did you do? Because I can say what I've done.
You first. No.
Yeah, I'll say.
Go.
Because I'm a little bit embarrassed about this, but I had cussed, but I was like, the person stood up. I didn't stand up, but I got very forceful. I said, "Sit the F down."
Wow. Did it work?
And I was like, "It sure did."
That was good.
Like I just pushed right back, and he's coming at me, and I just yelled, but I didn't get up because I thought I'm not going to get into a fighting stance. You think like quickly,
escalate quickly. For me,
and he did.
Yeah, he listened to you. You used that voice. That helps.
Yeah, no, I got very loud.
You came from the diaphragm.
Yes, I did.
You're a theater performer.
There you go.
They always taught us in training that you have to allow the patient to be near the door so they can escape.
Yeah.
As opposed to you being near the door to escape. I mean, it seems natural that you'd be closest to the door, but you really want to allow them to get out, right?
We used to have a coworker who always sat near the door.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to let you know.
But that was
we used to work together too.
Yeah, no, I've had
with dangerous people.
Yeah, they escalate, and I just stay calm. Like that's what I've learned. I've learned to stay calm because that de-escalates.
Yeah.
So I've been intimidated by all kinds of prisoners or other patients who've been into military. I mean, who are well trained and et cetera. And you just have to maintain your composure and talk them down. It's a de-escalation.
I've only been scared a few times.
Yeah.
And one was I was scared with actually one of Louis Farrakhan's bodyguards.
Oh, wow.
Which was so interesting to me,
Yeah.
but he was scary.
Yeah, he's scary.
He was a scary guy.
Okay.
And then I've been scared other times. But people, we used to work with people who were, very, very ill. And there were, escalations and things. But I never felt personally threatened.
Yeah, your physical integrity wasn't.
Yeah, no. Even though, we had things happen all the time.
Yeah. Well, she was scared. They had her portrayed as a scared person.
They did. But I also thought, well, she's petite and, this and that.
Yeah.
And I think she wanted to like him. Like she brings
Sandwiches.
Coco's. She brought a pickle sandwich, and which is like testing his boundary a bit, because he didn't like the pickle,
Right.
and it went on about the pickle,
Right.
Because basically he's trying to say. It's sort of like is he going to accept this?
Right.
Is he going to deal with this? Like she gave him a little task. I don't know if
Yeah.
that was intentional or
Right.
not, but it ended up being. She also gave him hot chocolate with marshmallows in
Yeah.
it. And she agreed to get him a second cup, which I don't think I would have done.
Yeah.
I would have said, well, you knocked that one. I can't guarantee
Yeah.
you won't do that
It might have
again."
been part of her strategy.
Maybe.
But-
I overall, I thought she did a good job. She got a lot out of the
Well,
guy.
she got what she needed.
Yeah, she sure did.
I mean, sometimes there's that sort of backhanded way of getting in there. We get trained a certain way, but maybe there's this other way of accessing a different patient. And I think she did, at least in the show.
But the ending scene of that episode 3, and he's being pulled away and screaming, and then just going ballistic and hitting the glass, as he's being pulled out of there. And you really see the fear settle in with her.
Yeah. And she gets very shook.
But they really did show that Jamie, whether it was already there or it happened while he's in prison, is now a fairly damaged human being. Like he's got some rage issues, and they start with that too. They show him attacking another.
Well, it's interesting too, because in life, when you have shame,
Right.
or when you feel angry or something, there are people who act out, and there's people who act internally, right? So you have people who are suicidal or depressed, or they have substance use issues or whatever, because they're feeling shame about XYZ. But then there's other people who act out, right? There's your externalizers and your internalizers, and he was, an externalizer is obviously a lot better for Hollywood than is an internalizer in that sense, at least in this show. And so
yes,
I think that's
you're right.
Yeah, in this show. But that they did show that. I mean, they really showed that at his age, he has no capacity really to, basically inhibit those impulses that are coming out. Because the frontal lobe's not fully myelinated yet.
Right.
You don't really have all that decision, judgment, and inhibition yet, and so he's just unbridled affect and rage and anger, and that's what they showed, and they displayed that. I mean, in a way that was very clear.
Yeah, no, they sure did. And then we go to the fourth. So that episode was 7 months later.
Yes.
The next one is 13 months later,
Correct.
called The Reckoning. That's
Yes.
what the name of the episode is. And this is where it focuses on the family.
Yeah.
And what the family 13 months, and not the family of the murderer,
Right.
Jamie's family.
Jamie's parents and sister.
And you come out, and once again, and I hate to harp on this, but
Yes.
once again, we see this theme arise of did he sexually abuse? Which obviously it's on these people's minds, because the dad walks out, episode 4, looks at his van, and it says nonce. Nonce? Yes, which I had to look it up.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I don't speak British slang.
Yes.
So apparently that meant pedophile.
Right.
And they misspelled it, so it's kind of
Right.
giving a, like the kids did it.
The
And
kids
you
did it.
find out kids did it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, again, trying to put blame, this thing, everyone's mocking and putting blame. And you just saw the torture in this family. And it was the dad's birthday. They were trying to have a nice day.
His 50th.
Oh, and it was anything but a nice day.
Yeah. I think that's what's really great about the portrayal in the 4th episode, is this up close and personal family experience. Like, how is this wreaking havoc on your life, and what are you doing with it? Like, we're also looking to see what do they do with the blame, right, and the guilt, and the community's response is to say he's a pedophile, right? So that's what I really like. Again, from that one shot, you're just with them all day. You're in the car, you're driving around, you go to the store, then you go home.
All one shot.
All one shot.
That's the craziest thing
right.
of this.
So you're up close and personal, and you're living this experience with the family. You're in the family. You're in the van.
I think when I heard the creator, talk about this, the dad, the guy who played the dad, that was the 14th time they did that one shot. So
Wow.
they did it. He said they do it 2 a day. They do
Right.
them several till they got the right one.
Right.
But 14th one, and it was a really special one. I was crying during that episode. That was the most tear-jerking episode. But you saw the ugliness in the community, like when he went to the hardware store. and there was a kid who is like part of the incel community they kind of suggest, and he's saying, she deserved it. It's basically, he should get off. You should crowdfund a lawyer. Right. And you're like, ooh, gross.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The community's got an ugly face.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the kids who doing that and teasing him and taunting him. And, and then and then parents coming home and grappling, did we do this to our son?
Right. Yeah.
And did they do it to their son?
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, I think they hint in the show that there are things about the dad that contribute to
like
this
he just
stuff.
Wasn't emotional enough.
Right.
He didn't really nurture his son from the
Correct.
point of view his son wanted to be
Right.
nurtured. He tried to keep making him into a traditional man.
Correct. Well, I think also he faced abuse, so he thought he should do the opposite, which is what we see in life a lot.
Yeah.
People experience a certain parenting, they think they should do the opposite of what they
Right.
experience, and so that was just like the pendulum swung way over there, and that wasn't going to be helpful. But if he could have spoken to his son, spent time with his son, and talked with his son, and had a more open, expressive relationship, is what they're implying, would have made things better. And plus, he worked 7 to 7 or something, so he wasn't around that.
Yeah, no,
much.
he was a hardworking dad.
Right.
But they have a whole speech about his playing soccer or football, and that when he went out to play, he was so bad that they put the boy on goalie.
Yep.
And the father had to look away in shame. And I'm like, God, come on, Dad.
Yeah.
He said, I couldn't look at the other fathers. I'm like, seriously? When you're a father of 2 boys, could you look at the other fathers?
Of course, 100%.
I mean, my God.
Wouldn't even blink. But that's obviously in his
Who
upbringing,
he
and
is,
who he
yes.
that's what he came with. That's what
Yeah.
he showed up with, and then now obviously he's thinking twice about that, about how he raised his kid and blaming himself. I mean, that's the problem. This blame game that you see, everybody's pointing fingers at family, at the kid. They're going to blame the girl. Everyone's pointing fingers at everybody else, which is again part of that shame rage. Like people aren't taking accountability for what might have been part of the issue.
And in fact, the most brilliant thing I think about this whole episode, well, I was just in tears. The father, had to come to grips with it and basically goes to his son's room and puts his son's teddy bear to bed and just breaks down crying. And I was in tears. It was
Right.
so hard.
And that was after the big reveal, though.
What was the big reveal?
The big reveal when they were driving in the car, and the kid called him to wish him a happy birthday.
Oh my God! Yes, the kid calls him to wish him happy birthday, and the big reveal is
Yeah.
yes.
He
jumped way ahead.
No, that he tells his dad, thinking he's only on the phone with his dad,
Right.
because remember from the first episode, it's like
He didn't want to talk to his mom.
he doesn't want to tell his mom or his sister because maybe his loathing of women or
Who
shame
knows?
or whatever the case might be. And then he's telling his dad, wishing him a happy 50th, and also mentioning that I did it basically. Like
Yeah, he said, I'm going to change my plea. So
gonna
he's going to
change my
accept
plea.
responsibility.
Then he finds out his mother and sister are in the car, and he gets really quiet.
Yeah.
That really pissed him off. That made him very angry.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want to talk to them. He wanted only to talk to his dad, which again aligns with this whole like masculinity thing and who he reports to, like who his person is, and that was really a pretty huge moment. And then they come home to the house, and that's when he sort of tucks in and puts it to rest.
So what was so brilliant about the show is that there were so many layers. And one layer,
Yes.
too, was at the very, very end. After that happened, they see their daughter, who's really amazing. You kind of get a sense that their daughter is really turned out well. And the family is very stuck together, and they're going to pull through this
Right.
together, which I like. They said, how do we raise such a good one? And the mother says the same way we did Jamie, like the same.
Yeah, that's right.
And in fact, that helps you to see, oh yeah, well, could it be the gender norms, or could it be the school stuff? Could it be the friends or the online bullying? Could it be, biology? Could it be the system? And plus, we don't know Jamie too much
Right.
arrest. We know he has some behavior problems, but so many kids do. They don't go out and murder someone.
Right.
So,
That's right.
there's a whole thing. There's a whole question of exactly where does this all fall?
The nature nurture discussion comes back to the table.
That's what I was going to say. I was like,
Yeah.
do we know what it was, or like how to prevent this, or like I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just scary to think that it can just happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think at least what I've been reading and what I've seen people talking about is that we don't create enough forums for, let's just say boys, for this discussion right now, where they can come together without their handheld, right, and talk to each other and share with each other and express to each other. And because if I say or do something at school and a kid records it, it's forever. If I cry about something in class that is cry-worthy, right, like it really affected me and I cry about it, all the kids pull their cameras out and record it, right? So you can't have an authentic emotional feeling without the fear that it's going to be in the meta world forever. Like basically, it's going to live on in perpetuity, and that's a scary thing.
Very scary.
It eliminates your capacity to be authentic, and so I think some of the work that's happening in the anti-manosphere is to try to get boys sans phone, like put all your phones away and come in and sit around and talk about certain things like who inspires you and who do you look up, having communal conversations with people that they can share freely, authentically, and not feel like they're going to be recorded or pictured or video, whatever it's going to be, and have that, and that builds community, right? I mean, it does. And we're missing that. We're missing that because we have our kids sitting home on laptops or on handhelds, or they're, doing whatever they're doing that isn't about interacting with each other, right? And having conversations. Like we're not on our phones right now. We're all sitting and talking to each other, right? So that's something that needs to be intentionally put into our community, right? Where people have like talking sessions all over again, where they're just hanging out together and talking minus their electronics.
That is a great idea. So how do you feel about taking phones out of schools?
I think it's a great
It's a very
idea.
leading question.
No, I think it's a really important that phones should be left at the door or
I believe
for
that
every
too.
class. And I know for a fact it's distracting not only the students because they're on Insta and TikTok and messaging their friends in class and sending pictures and videos and listening to music on their earbuds, and they're not learning. They're just not learning. It's not happening. Not to mention how disrespectful it is to teachers and to the learning environment. It doesn't work. So, I think phones should be out of the classroom 100%.
I do too, and I think you can do that with kids. I taught graduate school, and one thing I have to say is it's harder there because they really fight it, and the school backs them up.
Yeah, it's a problem.
And yet they'll sit there and still go on their phone. If they're on a laptop, you better know they're on the internet.
Correct.
They're not.
100%.
They're not writing their lecture
I've
notes.
sat at the back of medical school classes, and
Yeah.
everyone's searching,
Oh my God!
Yelp for where they're
Our
going for
residents
lunch.
were
It's like- yeah, for sure. So it's a problem, and it's not like that's not the reason why Jamie murdered this.
No,
right,
no.
Right, but I think
it's part of
it
the
is- if you
bigger
look-
picture.
Yeah, the bigger picture is that our electronic uptake is just excessive, and it's really interfering with learning and relationship. Again, the incel comment came from people feeling lonely. Not just because they don't have a romantic relationship, but they weren't feeling connected to people, right? And so, I think connection, right, attachment, connection is really the basis of our humanity, and it's funny they're called smartphones because they really make us dumber.
They do.
They make us dumber, and they really disconnect us. Even though people think they connect us, they don't really connect. I mean, so I think that is a big problem. And I won't demonize like social media or smartphones, but I will say that they have a part, like you said.
They play a role.
They play a role in how we're disconnected from each other. I mean, look, we could go walk to the local restaurant here, and couples are on dates on their phone. I mean, come on. What are you doing?
We have to go back to the days of 2 Dixie cups and a string, and I think then we'll have solved all the problems.
Yes. No, I think it definitely needs to be. There needs to be like breaks for sure. People need
do.
breaks from
agree
their
with that.
technology. I mean, there's another show that was out, right? The White Lotus that was out.
Oh, yeah.
And part of the checking in was putting your phone in the bag.
Which I loved, and I loved the family fought.
Right. Of course.
Because it's so real.
Of course it's real because people don't want to let go of it. It is everything that we know it to be. So, but I think that is a step in the right direction. People
do
be
too.
able to separate from their technology. And, I challenge people when we go out for dinner to put their phone away. let's just be here and have this conversation and share a meal.
So Jeff, well, I mean,
Yeah.
you and I go out to dinner, and I'll be on my phone the whole time
Yes.
right after this. Unfortunately, we need to end. We
just started.
I
Wasn't that
know
just
this is
episode
we could
1?
Honestly, talk so much about this. There's so much, but that does wrap up the show.
Well, thank you for
so
having
much.
me. It's
Thank
so
you
fun
for
to be here.
Thank you for coming and lending your expertise to such an important topic.
Thank you.
A reminder to like, subscribe, to give us 5 stars. Links to the studies, go to my YouTube page, youtube.com/Dr. Greg. If you have questions or topics, hit Brian up or hit me up at Ask Dr. Greg. This is Dr. Greg, Brian, and clinical psychologist with a specialty in child psychology and researcher, Dr. Jeffrey Gold,
Thank you.
bidding you farewell, and Tony too, bidding
Thanks, Tony.
you all farewell. Until next time, be present, be flexible, and be kind.